So, hello, Chad. I have with me Chad Ellis, who is the CEO of the Texas Agricultural Land Trust. And we were introduced at the EarthX Half Earth Day Conservation Conference, and it was focused on Texas private lands. And can you just tell me really just a little bit about what the Texas Agricultural Land Trust does? And hi, and thanks for
Sure.
taking the
Yeah.
time.
Well, thanks for inviting me and looking forward to the conversation. And Texas Ag Land Trust, we're a nonprofit, 15 years old. And we were developed by landowners for landowners to really be a solution oriented for them. And we were kind of the big three, what I call organizations started us. So the grassroots organizations of Texas Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association, Texas Farm Bureau, and Texas Wildlife Association. And it kind of came of landowners not having an issue of trying to keep their land and needing more tools in the toolbox. And conservation easement is one of those tools. And they wanted a trusted source to be able to help facilitate that and help keep those legacies and heritage together.
And is that, just out of curiosity, are you seeing a lot of change in that, given all these advances and like energy sources and water resource issues? And is it just like on steroids now, sort of
Yeah, it is. We don't lack work, right? And things going on as we look at it. I think another layer, Jennifer, to kind of think about is, we're going to have the largest transfer of wealth in our nation in the next 5 years, right? And most of that is the transfer of land. When we start thinking of the landowners, it's pushing 65 years of age, and so there's a lot to think through of what are my options, how do I hand this over, all of those things. And part of that is energy and other development and other things, right? So land is an asset, and it's trying to manage that asset through that next generation.
Right. Yeah, vital, huge topic. And we'll have to return to this. I can see we already have a sequel going because we're focusing on certain things today, and just to let viewers know. So what we'll do is first we'll look at some charts that you offered at the EarthX conference. Let me get to the beginning. I just pulled out a couple. So one is that, and I saw this article when it came out, that the US is running short of land for housing, and land, it's a land use issue. And sort of this gets to the heart of it. And maybe you can talk about this a little bit. And it looks like the absolute numbers in Texas of acres being converted from agricultural use, is that correct?
Yeah,
Is
correct.
changing. And then the proportion on the right hand side is less, because we have a lot of land in Texas. It's a huge state with
Yeah, so I mean, I think, Jennifer, I mean, one of the things, right, we're very competitive as being Texans, right? And we're winning this race, and unfortunately we're winning a race that we need to find solutions and think through. And we're losing probably the last census over 640 acres per day. And I think that number is actually getting closer to 1,000 acres a day of being converted, right? And so that's concerning. And when we start thinking about, we're also gaining, right? And I think we may have some of those slides as well. We're gaining, a huge amount of population increase. And so we're come to this connection and these kind of crossing roads of how do we handle the population increase and the things that we have.
Yeah, and that's what you're talking about here on these next slides, where the DFW metro area, 7.6 million. This is at 2020. And then if you look at this I-35 corridor, it's 11.2 million. And so this corridor goes from what's its top and its end point?
Yeah, so that's say Dallas. It's following down I-35 from Dallas to San Antonio.
Oh, that goes to
That's
San
that I,
Antonio. Okay.
yep, yep. So that's the I-35 corridor. And so, I mean, that's the thing, right? I mean, we look at this graph, and this is kind of that shocking moment when you see that blue and you see that 11 million. There's, individually, there's more people in that blue than individually 43 states
That's
in the U.
insane. Well, and yeah, go ahead.
No, no, go ahead. No,
And that doesn't even include the whole Texas Triangle area,
Ex-
which
exactly.
is, extend that Austin and Houston, and that's going to be a very big number.
It's
Um,
it's you're looking at, probably 45, 46 states probably. You're adding, so those are the things, right? And we think about 1,300 people moving to this state daily.
wow.
1,300 people daily.
And
So
this is not just because of the pandemic. I mean, this was happening even before. And this map you have here of Texas private lands, 83% rural, 17% developed. That's that whole on the left there. That's that whole Houston Gulf Coast area. Does
yeah, so
that
those are just, yeah, that's just seven, that's just showing a percentage and just how it's cut. It's not really from a coastal. So, I mean, really what we're saying that there's 83% of our 171 private lands, 83% of those are, a small business, right? Farmer and rancher, really stewarding those lands and providing, all kinds of goods and benefits back to us as a society of all Texans, not only, the commodity, but also clean air, clean water, open space, all of those things, right? When we think
yeah,
about this slide of those ecosystem services,
right.
that's what's really important. I think, we've from a society we've become further and further disconnected from agriculture into the land, right? And we take for granted, the water that we drink, and we don't really think about where that comes from,
Mhm.
right? We think, well, it comes from the faucet, it comes, from a bottle. Lyndon B. Johnson, Jennifer, I think had probably one of the best quotes in the early 40s. And LBJ basically stated, soil and water conservation starts where the first raindrop falls,
Mm.
right? And so if we think about that and where that raindrop falls is on one of those 83% um, of those landowners, those ranchers and farmers. And so what they do and how they handle and steward that land really, comes even from, all these goods and benefits of
Mhm.
water, clean air, open space, etc.
So, in looking at this chart, what can you say about what this is describing? And that's interesting in the very west tip of Texas here. Is that because of oil and gas production?
But yeah. So when this was done, it's a definitely heat map of showing where, a lot of the land use change and things of that. That far western is from oil and gas development, is
Mhm.
where a lot of that change has come from when this was developed by
Yeah.
the Natural Resource Institute of Center of part of Texas A&M.
Yeah, and we definitely see here's Dallas here,
Right,
and then
expanding.
Houston and the Gulf Coast, and then San Antonio, Austin, that whole area. That's really interesting. And then lastly on the slides, and then we'll get back to a couple of questions. So this was something you talked about at the conference, just trying to value land and put a value on acreage. And I see here on this map of Texas that this right-hand side, the prices are considerably higher. And some of that is that Gulf Coast area, but how would you characterize those really dark gray
Yeah,
areas? Why are those areas more highly valued than others?
sure. Yeah. So I think, when we think about, and we were able to put a value on, I think 11 ecosystem services that you can see here on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, land is just like individuals, is how I kind of say it, right? Every property or farm has its own DNA, right? And its own uniqueness. And there's every property then has potentials of different potentials. So when we start thinking about where we see a lot of that highlighted or darker with the higher value, a lot of that is more rainfall, the different soils, and different production, agricultural production. So we think of the eastern side, you have a higher timber and fiber production, right, from a forestry
Oh,
production further west. And so that's how a lot of those kind of why some of that is kind of scattered is what you see.
I had no idea. And I was even born in the East.
Yeah.
I left for a while and came
Yeah.
back, but I became an urbanite to,
But
um,
I think
yeah,
this number, real quick, Jennifer, is on average, right, from every acre across the state, right? There's a benefit to the public of $629 per acre, right?
yeah,
And this is a conservative number, and it's much higher because there's some other ecosystem services that we weren't able to put a value on at this point. This is kind of the foundation or the starting point. So when we start thinking that 629 times, the 141 million acres, et cetera, I mean, we're over $80 billion annually that these land stewards, these landowners are providing back to society, back to us, you and I sitting, me behind me sitting here in San Antonio. And so that's the importance.
and so of this $80 billion of value that you've kind of identified, would you say that only a fraction of that is being realized by the landowner?
That is exactly a true
That
statement.
is the
That is
problem.
Yeah, that
And
is the problem, right? And that's where we need to
oh,
start. So there's just a fraction of that actually these landowners are seeing. And so, but that's where I think, uh, stars are starting to align where there's,
yes.
we think about companies and we think about ESGs and sustainability goals that companies are having to go for, then hopefully that, there will be some opportunities that open up to landowners to help provide these ecosystem services and actually get paid. If you ask a landowner, and I'm a landowner myself, what's it cost me to develop, provide those $629? Well, it's not free, right? It costs me
Yeah.
money, time, energy, everything else to provide that. And so I think if we can, open the gate for that, then I think that gets us one, it keeps our land productive and in a working landscape that's keep providing for all of us. And so that's what we need is these opportunities and more incentives and more tools in the toolbox per se.
And one thing, just back to this, the value that you came up with, I mean, just in terms of rankings, it's like water is the most valuable, followed by food production, followed by, I would probably put in there energy production. And then carbon, again, I know there's others, but carbon was only like $13 an acre. And obviously that equation is changing because of all this new legislation, this new policy, the IRA and all that. And that's going to be interesting. And then you have, carbon markets, carbon ETFs, all that playing into it. But now kind of pivoting a little bit to some of this energy discussion. So relative to carbon storage, carbon capture, storage, and sequestration, it is a growing area. What changes do you see from your vantage point in Texas or in general?
From an energy perspective or carbon or
Just from a land perspective and just what you from your perspective.
Yeah, so I mean, I think from our perspective, right, is as I mentioned, is we're seeing more and more pressures today than we've ever seen, right? And the pressures are the land fragmentation that we talked about from development, those pressures to a landowner, and then the increased population. And those things come and those start hindering our freedom to operate, right? When we start thinking about that. So those are pressures on that side. But with that, I think there comes opportunities. And it's trying to wade through those opportunities and to think long term and to think through this asset that we have as a land of how do we protect it, how do we manage that, and how do we look on the future aspects of that asset.
Right. And and then I had sort of a question about because this is a land use issue regarding, there's a lot of wind resource in the panhandle,
Mhm.
and then solar resource, I guess, on the west half of Texas. And there's issues with building transmission lines, connecting
Correct.
to the grid, all that, driven by economic growth of renewables. What do you see and hear in terms of landowners and land use issues related to this kind of
Yeah.
infrastructure build out?
Yeah, so that becomes to the part, where I talk about that freedom to operate and some of those nexus of it coming together. So one of the, I would say, the biggest issues that comes from a landowner is eminent domain,
Mm,
right? And so when we think about that is, right, one, we need population growth, we need development growth, we need energy growth. But we just need to be thinking about it smart and where do we place it? How do we do this? And we don't have a lot of those policies or plans together as a state as a whole to help facilitate that. So
right.
when we think about now of the energy development of solar and wind, a lot of those placements not necessarily are placed in the best use of that land, right? It's convenience closer to a transmission line already, things of that nature. But we know that all of that will be developed soon and they're going to have to go further. And so more transmission lines will be needed, which, may mean that those major power lines are, coming in from an eminent domain through your property that may hinder your operation and the way you operate. So those are definitely a concern.
Yeah. I mean, as far as the wind resource in the panhandle, I read that those CREZ lines, those high voltage CREZ lines, I don't know if you're familiar with those.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. That, initially they were intended for like population centers, demand centers, like DFW and, other areas. But because when they were finished, they aligned with the advent of the, shale revolution part two of, the oil part. And just because I write about this and I know the
Yeah.
timeline. And so I read that a lot of that ended up going towards oil and gas production activities, the electricity. So, I mean, it's great, that renewable energy is being used in their operations, but then it didn't go to, power, to demand
So
centers. Is there anything that you know of that you have seen or heard in terms of new high high voltage type transmission lines, like connecting to the I-35 corridor, or how any of that looks?
I don't know the specifics, Jennifer. I mean, I know that, we're starting to see, technology is getting better and better. And, we're starting to see some of that play out. And I think, another 5 years, 10 years from now, it'll even be better than what it is today. And I think, um, I think technology is a solution part of this, of um, providing that energy, more efficient or in better ways, right?
Well, and the other thing too, I wonder is, you have that not in my backyard issue.
Mhm.
And we see that a lot, on the East Coast, mid-continent region, and they're also having challenges with getting transmission sited, and there's so much demand there. We have all this land, we have population growth. People are coming here because of the prospects of a lower cost of living. Um, but if we don't do this right, it's going to get expensive, and like you said, things are not going to get sited in the right way. And that, so you're saying there really is no master plan thinking on this at present, pretty much.
Yeah, no, I think
Right.
there's definitely, I think, areas of improvement, right? Of a better plan and a master plan, and thinking through it and being smart about it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we don't need it. We do. It's just, what's the plan and how do we connect,
Yeah.
the puzzle pieces together?
Yeah, because it seems like from what I'm understanding is there just may be all this regional variation in this, relative to demand centers, but all of us, the dots aren't being connected really for it to be efficient. And we have to be capital efficient because now money costs a lot more.
Right, right.
Well, that's interesting. Do you just back to the not in my backyard issue? Do you hear from a lot of the people that own, large ranches and, different kinds of developments that, they don't want transmission lines coming through their land? What's kind of the color on that?
Yeah, I would say majority of the landowners, don't want a power line or something coming through, right?
Right.
And that's, and there is some compensation and things of that nature, but for the most part, it disturbs, their operation through, maybe fence lines or transmission through, farmland or whatever they may do or utilize that property. And I think one of those other key ecosystem services, right, that we may overlook a little bit is, the value of open space and things of that
Yeah.
nature, right? And then you
Yes.
start having your view shed is clouded with power lines and other things, and and that starts affecting other, aspects of the ecosystem service of mental health and things of that nature that we can't put a dollar figure on. So all of those things, I do play. But then there's other families, right? I mean, that's the beauty of private property rights, is that there's a choice, right? A voluntary choice. If you want to engage and put solar panels, or you want to, put wind energy, again, and that's your decision. And that becomes another option to, how do you utilize the land? How do you utilize that asset? And thinking of the future as well. So it's a challenging time, and a lot to think through as a landowner of those options, and what are the true values of that land and what it means to you as a family.
Yeah, no, definitely. It is a big shift. It's a big generational shift. It's a where we are in terms of societal development, economic development, how you think through and manage growth, because growth is at the heart of it. And
I think one of the other, I would say, and energy, or not necessarily energy, but other things that has really helped maybe increase that fragmentation too. And you added this, what I'm about to mention, with the pandemic, is broadband,
mhm.
right? So we've increased broadband across to rural Texas, rural America. Um, the pandemic hit and people decided, oh, well, I don't have to live in one of those, Austin or Houston or Dallas. And as long as I have good internet connection, I can still do my work. So we've seen, a huge increase of even more fragmentation and more properties where people are, moving outside, hour and a half of those centers, still close to get to work for a day or two, or to airports. Um, but a lot of that, has been increased by broadband, which is kind of that double-edged sword, to help provide a service back to landowners, but it also increased a lot of that fragmentation, where I would say today we're closer to that 1,000 acres than we are 640 acres
Yeah,
lost data
yeah.
due to that.
And would you say that's driven by population growth coupled with economic development, and layering on the technology stack on top of it? Because yeah, if you add broadband, again, you're building more digital infrastructure, right?
Correct. Correct.
You have electricity infrastructure, you have digital infrastructure, you know, it's all happening, right?
Right.
It's a bit,
No, exactly right. And I think that's one of the other things is that we really should look at land as an infrastructure
yeah, sure.
and, yeah,
Absolutely.
and be part of that. So
Definitely. Yeah. Well, brilliant. I will stop recording here. I appreciate your time and insights about how things are changing in Texas, and you know, and it's kind of instructive about the rest of the country. And we're fortunate here because we have a lot of land, but yeah, we've got to use it wisely and come together.
yes, that's definitely so.